Welcome, everyone. I'm Abby Gondek, the Morgenthau Scholar in Residence at the FDR Presidential Library and Museum. And welcome to the session entitled New Intersections, Holocaust Studies in Digital Humanities. This is part of our 2021 conference entitled Examining American Responses to the Holocaust Digital Possibilities, hosted by the Roosevelt Institute and the FDR Presidential Library and Museum. This session is being streamed live on our YouTube channel. It's also being recorded. Live sessions can be accessed on the YouTube account for the FDR Library afterwards. And only registered attendees are able to participate in discussions. So those who are attending, please type your questions into the Q&A tab on the far right hand side of your screen so that our moderators can pose them to the panelists at the end of the presentation. I wanted to briefly go over our code of conduct for the conference. First, dialogue should be civil, respectful, and focused on Holocaust studies and digital humanities. Second, personal attacks, profanity, or hate speech will not be tolerated and violators will be blocked. And finally, any links or content not directly related to the conference will be removed. Our session today is being moderated by Michael Levy and Michael Haley Goldman, and I will turn it over to them at this point. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Michael, I don't know if you want to do some basic introductions and I'll jump in a second.
Yes, well, I'm Michael Levy. I'm director of the newly named Digital Access Division in the National Institute for Holocaust Documentation at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And Michael Haley Goldman recently was director of future projects at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, is now executive director of the New Hampshire Humanities. Michael, why don't you take it away for now.
I can take it away from here. So we're really excited to be part of this panel. I think the idea of the intersection between different types of digital scholarship and the Holocaust is obviously something we've been, Michael and I and many other of our colleagues from USHMM have been involved with for quite some time. And it's really exciting to see the different possibilities and the different organizations that are exploring this area. I'm going to give you a little bit of the context of what we've been doing at the USHMM just to kind of set up this idea of what does it mean to have digital scholarship as it intersects with Holocaust studies, what's been done by our organization, and a couple of hints of things that have been done elsewhere, just to get your heads around this. It occurred to me as we were setting up that even thinking about the kinds of technologies being discussed in this program for many of you out there aren't going to be things that are familiar. So I think it's really a good opportunity for you to be able to hear directly from people who are really deep in the work of thinking about machine learning, data science, all these different tools that are out there that allow you to use computer technology in ways that wasn't possible a decade ago, to really look at how that changes what is possible in Holocaust research and Holocaust studies in general. So just to give you a little bit of a background, a lot of the work that we had done at the USHMM was very much on the experimental side. So we started probably just about 5 years ago, really looking at machine learning as a tool to get a hold of collections that we couldn't easily approach through the normal techniques that we would use, right? When is a collection too large, too complicated, too all over the place, too dispersed to actually use some of the techniques that people have been working on for hundreds of years to make sense out of this collection? We were very fortunate to have Ben Lee as an associate fellow back almost 5 years ago, which is kind of painful to say out loud, that Ben came in and worked on a project with us, working with the International Tracing Service. Now, I'll spare you the long spiel about the International Tracing Service I usually do. Let's just say that it's big and complicated in ways that aren't always apparent. And part of that complication is the difference between a collection that has been digitized as images and between a collection that has really a lot of data in it. That's one of Michael Levy's favorite things to point out about that collection. Ben Lee, as actually time between when he was finishing his undergrad and before he started the PhD program he's in now, worked with us and using very, very basic tools, very, very low-powered computers to actually apply a machine learning routine to this massive card file of millions and millions of records to actually start to ask questions about what was in that card file in a way that we couldn't before. And that was really the starting point for us thinking about what does this mean? How does this kind of technology change the way we can actually start asking questions of the collections that we have. Then we had a lot of other people who did interesting projects kind of in a similar way. A lot of this was experimental, trying to kind of see what the edges of the possibility would be. Elena Hoffenberg, who is presenting tomorrow, so a quick plug for Elena, I think is at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, so catch her presentation during her associate fellowship with USHMM, was able to use some visual analysis tools coming out of the Yale's Digital Humanities program. Pixplot, I believe, is that tool, to ask questions about a corpus of Yisker books, about memorial books, but to think about it visually in a way that you really couldn't across books easily as one person. And she started kind of pulling that apart as part of her work. Michael Levy and his team started using readily available tools connected to our massive online and cloud-based storage to look at how you could use machine learning to see what was in images from the past. Russ Sitka, our colleague, started playing around with style GANs and doing some experimentation with that. There's also been some interesting work on facial recognition by an outside pro bono work with an engineer at Google. So there are all these small projects that are starting to pull apart what does it mean that there are technologies that can approach large collections in ways that humans can't. But I think one of the key elements about that is that the humans are still a really vital part of that process. We tend to talk about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning as these kind of magic activities. And what you'll see from the project you're going to see through the rest of this presentation is that humans are really a vital part of that process. And what does that mean? That these technologies are something you have to understand in a way that allows you to work hand in hand with these kinds of opportunities. Finally, I want to point to the largest program we've done around machine learning and data science, and that is with the postdoctoral fellow, Dr. William Mattingly. William is working actually at the Smithsonian Data Science Lab with great colleagues over at the Smithsonian, but working with Holocaust collections. And William is really imagining an incredible array of techniques that can be used at scale for an entire archive. How do you actually start making a sense of the archive and applying the right tools to the right documents at the right time? William has been speaking about this project for a while, and he's been posting a lot of the raw materials online. So I won't try to do justice to his work in this 5-second kind of blurb, but it's been an incredible learning experience for us at the museum. I'm sorry, them at the museum. I'm not used to not being there. But for the USHMM, to think about what would this mean? What would something at scale mean for the way we do the work of managing an archive and doing research in an archive? And William has been showing through workshops with the USHMM staff how those kind of questions will grow and evolve. So I'll say more a little bit about some of the conclusions that we have from that in a second. But then I also did want to stop there and say, that there are, of course, a lot of other people working on this. Michael, I don't know if you want to say anything about, through your work with various European organizations, that some of the machine learning and other interesting projects happening there.
One project that we've been working on, actually not through the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure, but directly, is at the University of West Bohemia. There are some computer scientists there, specialists in language modeling, speech recognition, semantic entity extraction, and to me it's a really interesting example, as they're interested in our Holocaust oral history testimonies, working with speech to text, and seeing some of the advances that are being made where we have English spoken with strong accents, many unusual terms that are used, mixed languages and so forth. They're interested in increasing their models, their machine learning models, using speech to text techniques. And we are going to get a text that's extracted, and they also work on a technique called forced alignment, where in some cases we have transcripts that have been that a person has transcribed, but it's not time-based, and they can match the timing of every word and phrase so that we can then take it and turn it into captions, and eventually make search interfaces that would take you right to the term that's spoken. So it's definitely a very exciting time where there's a lot of collaborations between collection holding institutions and computer scientists. And of course, we're going to hear quite a bit about that. today. Michael, do you have more, or should I hand it over to Abby at this point?
Couple of last points. I think one of the things that I was going to mention, I mean, there's so many projects in the last 5 years that have come up in cultural institutions, not only within the Holocaust, but elsewhere. But what I think I would emphasize is that there are not enough organizations that are working with Holocaust documentation really involved in the discussion yet. So it's so exciting to see this collaboration. And I hope it's a model for all of you out there about how you all can get involved in this discussion, because what it really needs is a larger community of people doing this work, so that we can have these kind of panel conversations, and we can have more work moving forward. I think the 3 important opportunities for you as an audience to think about as you're listening to this presentation, one, that the tools that are being used are really important to think about as tools within the sphere of Holocaust studies and within cultural studies in general. Remember that a lot of this technology is being developed primarily for other uses, especially large organizations that are working on machine learning and other tools. They're not thinking about the specific nuances of the collections that we work with. And so the more that we as a community can start doing that work and sharing that work with each other, the more these tools can really fit the research questions that we have and the nature of the collections that we're working on. Second, I think one of the other things that came out of William Mattingly's work that was really important is that you shouldn't have to be a data scientist, you shouldn't have to be a computer scientist to really understand how to apply these kinds of technologies. And what that suggests is the need for new interfaces, which is something you'll hear about later in this project. How do you as a researcher, how do you as an archivist learn to work with the kind of tools that are being applied to these collections in ways that you can actually think about them and work with them yourself. Not to say that the collaboration piece with lots of people with all kinds of knowledge won't be important, but there's new interfaces that are going to need to be developed to do that. And this is an important step in the process. And finally, just the new opportunities that there's so much that can be done by any one individual or one group of individuals. And this technology really represents the opportunity to scale up the kind of work that you're doing and ask questions that you could never do by hand. And that's what you're going to see in this project. So I won't take it more time, but really excited to hear all the details of this project. And I want to pass it over to Abby.
Hello, my name is Abby Gondek, and I am the Morgenthau Scholar in Residence at the FDR Presidential Library and Museum in Hyde Park, New York. And I'm going to use this video to give you an introduction to the Morgenthau Holocaust Collections project and introduce you to some of the research I've been doing, explain a little bit more about my role at the library. The Holocaust Collections project at the FDR Library is a digital, historical, and pathfinding initiative to raise awareness of the FDR Library's unique but underexplored resources for Holocaust studies. The Morgenthau Holocaust Collections project was started in 2017, and it was named in honor of Henry Morganthal Jr., who was the Secretary of the Treasury for FDR during all his years of his presidency. And they were close friends, and Morgenthau was an important advisor for FDR. To give you a little bit of more background about who Henry Morganthau Jr. was, I created this blog. It was my introductory blog. Henry Morganthau Jr. was Jewish, but he wasn't very Jewishly involved. And it wasn't until 1943 that he became much more involved in the debate about Jewish refugees. And so I'm very interested in the members of his staff who influenced him and encouraged him to become more involved and to convince the president to take a more active role in saving refugees in Europe during World War II. And especially I'm interested in exploring the roles of lesser known figures in his treasury staff, including a woman named Henrietta Klotz. And I also wrote a blog about her. Henrietta Klotz, this is the picture of her here. She worked as Henry Morganthau Jr.'s secretary for 37 years, and she played an extremely influential role on convincing him to become more involved in the refugee rescue and relief efforts. So one of the primary resources that I've been using for my research so far is the Henry Morgenthau Jr. Diaries. And Henrietta Klotz took a central role in organizing these diaries into bound volumes with the assistance of the Treasury librarian. Her name was Isabella Diamond. So Henrietta supervised the organization of 864 volumes of the Henry Morgenthau Jr. Diaries. Henrietta and Isabella Diamond developed these index cards to navigate through the Henry Morgenthau Jr. Diaries. And this is an image of one of them here. I'm interested in finding evidence of how Henrietta was influential. So one of the things that I do is look through the diaries to find specific documents within the diaries that are evidence of the influence that Henrietta played, but also the role that other members of Henry Morgenthau Jr. staff played in influencing the positions he took regarding refugees, and especially Jewish refugees in Europe. So an example that I wanted to show you was this page from volume 688, part 2, from December 1943, page 89. And this is a Jewish evacuation meeting transcript. So this is one type of document you can find in the Henry Morgenthau Jr. Diaries. In this particular meeting, Henrietta is arguing that Henry Morgenthau Jr. needs to go to the president himself directly to convince him to do more to save refugees. And so this line here is the one that I wanted to emphasize in this particular page. Henrietta says, "Mr. Morgenthau, nobody would do, none of these people you mentioned, when they are put on the spot, will do what you will do." So I really like that because it shows how she went about influencing him. These diaries are not traditional or typical diaries. They are instead a day-to-day log of everything that happened in the Treasury Department, not just related to refugees, but overall, everything that happened in the Treasury Department. So it includes, for example, phone conversations, meeting transcripts, memos, correspondence, any type of paper documents that went through the Treasury Department. For my role, I'm specifically interested, of course, in Holocaust-related documents, specifically things related to refugees, and especially Jewish refugees, and also anything related to the War Refugee Board, once the War Refugee Board was created in January 1944. So this is the landing page for the Henry Morgenthau Jr. Diaries. It can be accessed through Franklin, which is the search database of the FDR library. And it's important to note that the way that this is set up is exactly how you would find it if you went into the research room at the FDR library. So it gives you a really great experience of what it would be like to actually be in the research room, because this is organized in the same way as you would find it in real life. So it's maintaining the original archival context, which is very important. So the Morgenthau Diaries are organized into bound volumes. This is from the Morgenthau Project homepage. And here's an image of what the bound diaries look like. So there are 864 of these. Each one covers several days, and each one has a table of contents. And there are also index cards which help you to navigate through the 864 volumes. And of course, the index cards were created by Henrietta Stein-Klotz, who was Henry Morgenthau Jr.'s secretary, as well as the Treasury librarian, Isabella Diamond. So this is a picture of one of the index cards under the category refugees. And then these are subtopics, and you can find them in volume 688. And these are the page numbers you can find them in. There are 3 series of the Henry Morgenthau Jr. diaries. There are the diaries themselves, the presidential diaries, and the index. The index is made up of index cards by category, like I was showing you before with refugees. And these are scans of each index card is put into a PDF. So they're batches of index cards. And what I'm going to talk more about right now is the diaries themselves. So here they're listed by volume. And so this is what you would see if you went into the research room and you were wanting to look at a volume of the Henry Morgenthau Jr. diaries. I showed you a specific document that indicated how influential Henrietta was on Henry Morgenthau Jr.'s stance regarding refugees, rescue and relief of refugees. So this particular document is on page 89 of volume 688, part 2. So I actually wanted to show you how to find that. In my blog post, which I'm looking at right now, this is the link to the PDF, but I wanted to show you from the diary homepage how to find that. So I would scroll down all the way to volume 688, part 2, which is right here. And this is the beginning of the meeting, the Jewish evacuation meeting. So you would be able to read the entire meeting if you wanted to. And the page that I selected is page 89. And then here, Mrs. Klotz says, Morgenthau, nobody could do, none of these people you mentioned, when they are put on the spot, will do what you will do. And she's talking about the importance of him going to talk to the president about saving refugees.
So as we go on in the presentation, you'll learn more about how we are trying to improve accessibility to the Morgenthau Diaries and kind of using what's already there and building upon that and creating a new interface in order to be able to more easily access specific documents within the Morgenthau Diaries. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Richard.
Maybe I can do a quick introduction. First of all, thank you so much, Abby Gondek, for providing this historical contextual information about the Morgenthau Diaries and Henrietta Klotz. Dr. Richard Marciano is a professor at the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland. He's an affiliate faculty member of the Institute for Systems Research and the Department of Computer Science. Prior to that, he was professor at the School of Information and Library of Science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and was a research scientist at the San Diego Supercomputer Center at UCSD. His research interests center on digital curation, digital preservation, sustainable archives, cyber infrastructure, and big data. And Dr. Marciano.
Richard, we cannot hear you currently.
Richard, I still see you as muted, but I do not have the power to unmute you.
We may wish to go on to the next presenter while Richard Marciano works out an audio issue.
Okay, are you able to hear me now?
Oh yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Yes.
I apologize. It's my headset, which has been flaking out for the last few days, and I think it may finally have died. I'm really sorry about that. I'm on my regular machine. You're able to hear me now? Okay, my apologies. So much for technology, huh? So it's my pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel. We've been working with Abby and Kirsten and FDR colleagues since January of 2020, and I'd like to provide a little bit of context on this project, what this represents, this sort of computational shift that Michael Haley Goldman and Michael Levy referenced in their own institutions. Just checking that my audio is still good. Okay, thank you. So how does this session relate to the overall conference? Well, I went back and looked at the original goals, and these were some of the compelling questions. How can Holocaust research be advanced by the latest developments in technology? So I'm going to talk about computational archival science, and I'll introduce that in the next few slides. It's a space we've been exploring that very much relates to what we're calling now artificial intelligence, machine learning developments, but it's sort of a broader connection with where digital archives are going. So that's our first question, or first intervention. The second question that I thought was relevant: how can Holocaust make use of technology to change access patterns and the way users interact with materials? You'll see the next presentation, and Teddy will talk about that in particular, of the development of some novel interfaces. And we'll have an opportunity to demonstrate that this afternoon, if any of you are interested in joining us in the second workshop. And finally, what does machine learning have to do with all of this? Well, I think Michael Haley, Goldman, Michael Levy have already made a case for that, and that's going to be the focus of our presentation. So what is this thing we're calling computational archival science? Well, it's an effort we launched actually going on 6 years ago. There's a portal link here if any of you are interested in. And it's an initiative that started with practitioners, researchers, computer scientists talking about the computational turn and the impact precisely on the kinds of collections that Abby just described. So we gave it a definition 5-6 years ago as a field interested in looking at the application of computational methods at scale, which was one of Michael's comments. And with the aim of improving efficiency, productivity, precision, and in a number of areas, including appraisal, arrangement, description, preservation, and access decisions. So we've had 5 international meetings. We're going to have a 6th one in December. And actually, there's a call for proposals. So any of the attendees who are working on amazing projects, as demonstrated in this conference, there's still time if you're interested in participating or presenting some of your work related to the Holocaust. We've had over 30 workshops and 50 papers, and it's just contributing to these interdisciplinary conversations of digital archives and their computational treatments. These are the kinds of projects we work on. This is computational archival science to unlock Japanese American World War II camp experiences. And this is an example with 20 students working in teams, in very interdisciplinary teams with archival students and computer scientists and undergrads. So this is kind of the secret sauce of learning how to work collaboratively across disciplines on archival topics using technology. And these are examples of projects looking at name registries, vital records, controlled vocabularies, mapping movement between camps, events, and people, connecting people through events inside camps. So a different historical background, but very relevant to the kind of work that's happening with the Holocaust. So in January, when we started our partnership with FDR, we actually met in London pre-pandemic at the Alan Turing Institute, launched this initiative and a center to go with it called the Advanced Information Collaboratory, the goals of which very much intersect with what's happening with the questions that were posed to all of us as part of this event. of exploring the opportunities and challenges of disruptive technologies, including digital curation, machine learning, AI, pursuing multidisciplinary collaborations and the significance of that, and leveraging those kinds of technologies to unlock the hidden information in these kinds of stores. That's just the human side of it. Those are folks who helped found this from the UK to the US. They're archivists, information scientists, data scientists, wide. And then we have a research network that spans 5 continents now, with folks interested in these kinds of issues. And that's part of our event and meeting. Lastly, with a little bit of context, just to add some fuel to the kinds of initiatives that really have picked up steam over the last year and a half. A year ago, we launched this farm. So we're all farmers, I guess. We launched this farm initiative called the Future of Archives and Records Management, out of which we started, and that's the last bullet, and that's what I'm going to focus on next, I promise. We started this conversation on machine learning strategies for FDR presidential library collections. But the other kinds of projects, I mentioned the first one was Japanese American camps. We have a collaboration on computational treatments of the legacy of slavery, and then looking at African American photo archives with our colleagues from Spelman College and AI-assisted frameworks to do that. So a little bit of that background. I guess I have one more slide, just to corroborate the explosion of activities and why the time is right to bring these conversations into this kind of conference. If you just look at what's happened in the last few months, I should probably mention my colleagues at the National Archives. They hosted a Mellon workshop in April and May with a series of 5 workshops on thinking about records, archives, and artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I was privileged to be part of those conversations. And NARA, for the first time in April, released a number of data sets that are suitable for those kinds of explorations and manipulations, both photo archives and textual archives. And then a flurry of projects in Europe. This is from a colleague, Lise Jaillon, in the UK, and she has 3 ongoing events: Unlocking Our Digital Past, Archives in the UK and Ireland, and AI, and a current project, if any of you, so this is a plug for that, I guess, but it's very relevant. Aeolian, which looks at artificial intelligence for cultural organizations. There's 6 workshops. The first one just happened, and there's 5 more that are queued up. So an incredible amount of momentum in conversations and something to build on. Last but not least, a reference paper for all of us from my incredible colleagues from the University of Amsterdam. They just put this piece out. I think it's about to be published, but you can find a preprint online on an overview of current debates and future perspectives in archives and AI in cultural institutions. A really great article that takes the pulse of where we're at this particular moment, fall of 2021, what the debates are, and where this is likely to go. Okay, back to the collection of interest. I hope this wasn't this context I provided wasn't too much of a distraction, but it's just to situate these efforts. So Morgenthau Holocaust Collection, I just have a few slides to kind of introduce the next speaker, Teddy Randby, and I really want to talk about the digital journey of a diary here. It's almost like the diary swimming upstream and going through a series of digital transformations so we can prep it and get it ready for machine learning, because as Abby pointed out, these things are not naturally suited for digital treatments. There's a whole processing phase, and very often we just talk about kind of the flashy machine learning computational part, but there's all this prep work that needs to be done in the background, and that's going to be my focus to close off my segment here. So as Abby said, 864 physically bound diaries. Since these were scanned, there's close to 900 PDF files, close to 300,000 pages. Each of these volumes has some leading pages, which I show here, a cover page, and a so-called table of content. which is not quite a table of content, but it's an index to each of the diaries. And that's that's the focus of our machine learning exercise today. But we're working on all the pages in the volumes, and Bill Underwood will, the next speaker will talk about that. So we need to pre-process these diaries towards machine learning treatments. And what we ended up doing was going to the Morgenthau website, and we literally we scraped the information off the website. That's what the information at the top looks like. And we parse the HTML for series 1, and then pulled out all the references to PDF files, crawled all those PDFs, downloaded them. From those PDFs, that's step 3, we extracted those leading pages, the table of content, from each volume. We then exploded that PDF segment into individual JPEG images and parse those images to populate the table you see on the right. So essentially, we're creating not a diary of the diary, but an inventory. And that's what this looks like. We're creating a content tree for all the diaries. And I think this is my last slide. So the digital journey of a diary from soup to nuts, aka from diary to what we call name value pairs, this is what that process looks like. We do digital curation, pre-processing, which I just alluded to, and then a preview of what's coming next in Teddy's presentation. You'll see a 2-step machine learning on the pre-processed images that leads to a splitting, an extraction and splitting of the content into name value pairs and a storing into a database. Things we might discuss later are how we enrich that database and actually use crowdsourcing and build interfaces. So last but not least, we start with 864 diaries. We go to some 3,500 images, and that leads us to some 23,000 attribute value pairs that go into a database. And that's sort of our knowledge base and what we use to build interfaces. Thank you very much.
So much, Richard. So next up, we have Teddy Randby, who will speak on the technical specifics of this project using machine learning and artificial intelligence, referring to a paper that was published. Teddy is a research fellow in the Advanced Information Collaboratory at University of at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's an undergraduate student in computer science, conducted a summer internship in 2021 with the Advanced Information Collaboratory at University of Maryland, and is working with the team of Dr. Richard Marciano here, exploring innovative ways of applying digital curation and machine learning to cultural collections. Also has interest in user experience and web usability. So Eddie, please take us away.
Thank you very much, Michael. All right, can everyone see my presentation? Everything perfect? Okay, yes, so I will be, as we saw there on Richard's last slide, we saw the soup to nuts, the whole journey of the digital journey of this collection. And I'm going to be getting into the weeds on that a little bit more. And so I'm not going to give you any more background about the collection, but just want to reiterate, we're focusing on the index pages and how we can digitize those, because that sort of maximizes what we get out of this digitization process. Because once we have that index digitized, we can use that to access the entire volume, all of the entire collection, without having to digitize everything else. So on this, where does this digitization journey begin? We started by looking at some of the traditional computational approaches. So using natural language processing to look at the structure of text and pull out entities and maybe recognize some patterns and use that to help get some metadata about the text, and also optical character recognition, which is of course crucial in going from images of text to actual data that you can use stuff like NLP on. So we started with these sorts of technologies and quickly ran into some issues with them. And but before I get into those issues and how that sort of our journey began, I want to also mention that these technologies that have been around for a while are starting to implement all of their features with machine learning, because it's a very good tool to solve these kinds of problems. So as you can see, Abby FineReader is using artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms now. Stanford NLP, a bunch of their packages are using machine learning under the hood, and Google's OCR engine has recently added a new neural net. So all of these technologies are adopting and bringing in machine learning under the hood because it's extremely useful for these sorts of problems. And speaking of useful machine learning for these sorts of problems, I'd like to bring up this sort of specialization. So a lot of these models that I've just mentioned, NLP from Stanford NLP and Google's Tesseract engine, those are very general. They work on any image with text in it and it will give you the text, or it'll work on any sentence and it will tell you who the subject and noun is. So, and that's useful, but if you get more specific with your model, you can pull out, your model will be better, and it can also pull out specific pieces. As you can see here, this is an example from NanoNest, which is a business that sells these sort of models to other business. I've just taken a screenshot of the demo here. But you can see they're selling this passport model that will pull out the specific first name, the last name, and the nationality of this this generic here passport. So using a specialized model like this, and even training your own to apply that to historical documents, can be really efficient for pulling out and labeling specific nuggets of information that are really important in these historical documents. So like if we remember the index cards that Abby showed us, those index cards would be a great application for this because you can pull out the header specifically and the book like 688 that was up in the top right corner there. You can train a specific model to look at that and pull out the nuggets of information that you need. And so that's where we want to be with this collection and these index pages here. But as you can see by looking at these here, there are some problems with that. And the main problem is that these pages are not uniform. Passports are pretty uniform in their layout and what they look like. And especially like receipts are another thing that you see the sort of NanoNet specialized models being used for. Those are also very uniform. But these pages are lacking. The structure changes page to page. There's, content is sort of all over the place. But the key observation is that there is structure and these sort of repeating header and content blocks. So there's a header and then there's an indent and some content and then maybe another indent and a list or some pages on the right. So recognizing this sort of repeating block, even though the pages aren't always identical, they have these blocks repeating which are structured and uniform. So if you could somehow take some magical scissors and cut out all of these blocks from each of the individual pages and then work on that new collection of blocks, you would have a totally different story. You could train a specialized model to look at those blocks which are now structured and pull out the special nuggets that you need. So the first problem to solve was to find those magic scissors that we could use. And that's where we turn to something called object detection. This is something that, again, you see mostly used in businesses and enterprisal in an enterprise way. Like, for instance, Tesla's self-driving. They need object detection so that the car can look ahead and see that there's another car or there's a red light or keep track of the lines on the road. So object detection is very useful for those sorts of problems, but it can also be applied here to our problem because we need to cut out specifically those boxes, which we can train a model to just recognize as an object as it would a car. So that was the first step here, was training a model to recognize those boxes and slice them out and transform our collection of table of contents pages into a whole new collection of these boxes. And once we have this uniform structured collection, we can train that next phase of machine learning to pull out all of the nuggets of information that we want, which is what we're seeing on this page. So in the top left of that there, we have the Social Security bill header, which has been labeled with that blue box as the machine learning model has identified that as a header. And then all of the green boxes underneath that are being identified as content, so on and so forth for the date, the book, and the page. You can see how, because we've transformed our problem into this structured and uniform shape, we can use this specialized machine learning model to pull out and label all of these pieces. And once you have that, you can transform and process that into a database, which you can then build all sorts of resources on top of. And so this here is sort of just a recap of the full journey that an entry has through our datafication process, where it goes from just being among the blob on the page to being recognized by the phase one sort of magical scissors snipping, pulling out the boxes, running that through our specialized machine learning text extraction and labeling those special key value pairs, which you will see here in the database. And once we have all of these databases, this database hooked up, you can then build on top of that, start all of these user interfaces, and you can start worrying about making that data as accessible as possible. And then maybe doing some transforms on that data to give researchers some more metadata and information about the documents and their structure. And so that's where I'm starting to get into the future of this collection and what this datafication process means and what more we can do with it. And that is where our next speaker, Bill, is going to take over. So thank you, everyone. Take it away.
Thank you, Teddy, so much. I think I can imagine that attendees here who have a kind of a visual representation of the steps that you went through, it makes a lot of these concepts a little more concrete and visually understandable. We have Dr. William or Bill Underwood, who will speak on the future directions relating to technology, document boundaries, scholarly annotations, and so forth. Dr. Underwood is a computer scientist, currently a research scientist in the Advanced Information Collaboratory at the University of Maryland, formerly an assistant professor and principal research scientist at Georgia Tech. General areas of research include artificial intelligence, with specializations in natural language processing, machine learning, knowledge representation, and automated reasoning. For the last 25 years, he's been applying computational methods, including artificial intelligence methods, to research issues in operations.
Thank you, Michael. Alec, would you load my presentation, please?
While this is loading, if I may just jump in, and any attendees, please feel free to enter any questions at any time into the Q&A. And as we have time, we will the panel will address any questions. So please interact in this way.
1 second.
Thank you, Alec. Okay, this is the title of my presentation today. Alec, next slide, please. During the period 1930 to 1950, use of index cards to provide access to chronological files was common in the federal government. Many of the records in the National Archives for that period are still accessed using index cards, as you've seen today. For example, in the National Archives, this includes index cards to the records of the internal security cases of Japanese American housed in relocation camps during World War II. that Richard mentioned, the project that we've been involved in previously. Even when the records in the chronological files are digitized, they're commonly accessed by reference to the digitized index cards. Next slide. A common approach of archival institutions in creating a digital archives of paper records has been to scan them and make their images available online or at workstations in the archival research rooms. In the iSchool at the University of Maryland, we introduce students in the Archival Studies program to the digital curation of archival records. This includes computational methods and tools that are not usually used by archivists. Digital curation of records adds value to a collection in a way that is similar to the way that curators in museums add value to museum specimens through museum exhibits. Next slide. We have identified several opportunities for digital curation of the Morgenthau Diaries. They are, as you see here, the construction of an actual table of contents of the volumes with link to the contents, in addition to the indexes that you've seen created. Secondly, a faceted search of the diaries. Thirdly, edited Morgenthau diaries where historians annotate and comment on events and individuals that are mentioned in the diaries. And finally, links to scholarly publications and records that occur in other digital collections. Next slide. The indexes to the Morgenthau diary volumes are sometimes referred to as the table of contents to those volumes. Perhaps this is because they appear at the beginning of the volume. However, they are not table of contents. The table of contents is a list of the chapters or sections or the documents in a collection or a book or a volume or periodical. Whereas an index, often referred to as a back of the book index, typically is placed at the end of the book with corresponding page references that point the readers to the location of subjects or topics within the book. Next slide. Okay, here we see the first part of an index to volume 689. Richard and Teddy, as was previously discussed, have OCR'd some of the indices and structured them for potential enhanced digital access to the volumes by subjects, persons' names, organization names, and location names. Next slide. An archivist manually created this table of contents that you see on this slide from the same volume. It adds value to the volume by providing access to the entries in the volume by document title or by document types, and by beginning page numbers of the documents and the length of the documents in the volume. The question is there a computational method to accomplish what the archivist has accomplished in creating this table of contents? Next slide. A faceted search interface would use the indexes to the collection by date, person, organization, place, and subject, or facets, to support search of the Morgenthau collection. The WorldCat search interface that is shown in this slide is an example of a faceted search interface. It is a search interface that many of you are probably acquainted with to the holdings of more than 10,000 libraries worldwide. Its indices or facets are based on the Dublin core metadata captured for publications in the libraries. Next slide. This slide shows some examples of person names and organization names that were manually extracted from some of the indexes and papers in the Morgenthau Diaries. We've also manually extracted some of the location names and subjects. How might we do this automatically? Next slide. This slide illustrates how the Morgenthau Diaries might be annotated with scholars' observations on individuals, events, and actions that are recorded in the diaries. It also indicates how scholars' articles and documents in other collections might be linked to and accessed from a digital edition of the diaries. A digital edition might be created using a tool such as Wikimedia that is used to create Wikipedia, but where the editing access was limited to Morgenthau and Holocaust scholars and editors. Next slide. In a workshop this afternoon, I'll introduce a computational tool and computational concepts that can be applied to the digital copies of the Morgenthau Diaries to enhance access to the diaries. This will include answers to the questions: how can we automatically create a table of contents to volumes of the diaries? And how can we automatically create the indices to support faceted search? And that completes my presentation this morning.
Richard, would you be able to reshare your PowerPoint? So I'm going to talk briefly about a new development that we've been working on to create an interface to be able to better navigate through the Morgenthau Diaries, building upon all the work that's just been discussed. So later this afternoon, we're going to be leading a workshop where we're going to give you the opportunity to interact with this interface. But for now, I just wanted to kind of give you introduction to it. So it allows users to search on the left-hand side under Find and Filter for keywords, for specific diaries, for specific dates. And there's also a series of tags that we've created, and I've tagged documents related to the three main research projects that I've done at the library. And then in the center, in the results category area, you'll see the results of your search based on what you've entered on the left-hand side. And so this is showing you from volume 688, the category State Department and all the kind of content that was in the kind of underneath the main heading. And this is coming directly from the table of contents or the index to volume 688 of the Morgenthau Diaries. And also you can see that the organizations, locations, and persons have been identified within each of these documents. And so you can see those in purple. You can see all the organization names that appear. And this is all automated through the machine learning process. Next slide. This is down below. So this is the same interface, but just the lower portion of the interface. And it allows you to visualize the things that you have entered above. And so you can enter, for example, in this particular screenshot, I entered keywords refugees and children. And I've selected on the right word occurrences over volume, which will show you how many times those words occur over the different volumes. So here we've cleaned the data for 1944. So it's displaying for you the volumes from 1944, and it's showing you in turquoise how many times the term refugees appears in the table of contents and how many times children appear, the term children, and that's the navy blue. And I think I will just stop there in terms of introducing you to the interface. We'll go over more about the interface in the session this afternoon, but I want to make sure that we have time to answer the questions from the audience. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Abby. And I want to apologize to Abby. I was so excited to get the program rolling that I skipped Abby's bio. Michael, I don't know if you have that handy, but can we catch it up so that
Oh no, I think it's okay because I kind of introduced myself in my video, so I think that's fine. I think we should
Abby is the Morgenthau Scholar in Residence in the Roosevelt Institute at FDR Presidential Library and Museum. I'll just say I hope that many in the audience are feeling excited about the afternoon workshop where the panel will do a deeper dive. But I think at this point we do have some questions, and Michael, you want to kind of facilitate questions from?
Yeah, I'll start some of the questions we're getting in. I'm going to read these. I might edit them down a little bit because of time to try to get in as many as possible. But the first question is from am I allowed to tell people? Am I out? Is it okay to include people's names? This is actually from another one of the Associate Fellows in Digital Humanities from USHMM, Christine Liu. So it's exciting to know that Christine's on the line with us. And she also wants to thank the presenter for such a clear explanation of both projects and the computational process. Really is talking about the importance of collaboration. But I'm going to skip down to her question. She was wondering if your work has any there have been any efforts towards applying these approaches towards victim experiences or narratives, getting creative with source materials or otherwise, or if this issue has been discussed, what are the problems that you've considered that might make this sort of orientation difficult? Does anyone want to get into that, or do I need to slow down in asking the question?
I can answer from my position as a kind of user of the diaries. So what Christine says about the fact that these are administrative documents, that definitely it's a certain lens on the Holocaust and American responses to the Holocaust. It's an internal governmental approach and view. And but I will say that sometimes you will get, for example, that appear in the Morgenthau Diaries, letters from either organizations or individuals appealing for aid for specific kind of people who are trying to escape from the Nazis. So those sorts of things could potentially be accessed through the interface and within the Morgenthau Diaries. But it would need to be, you would need to know kind of who you're looking for. Like currently there's no way to search, for example, for like victim experiences. So I think that could be a little bit challenging. I don't know if anybody else has any kind of comments on that question.
Just note that, although I think Christine knows this, that some of the work that is being done by William Mattingly is looking at oral histories as a source and looking at ways that some of the computational approaches can be used within those records. And that's still in a very early stage. So there's no kind of results, I think, coming out of that yet, but it is definitely an area that's being explored by that project.
I'm wondering if maybe Bill, I know Bill has worked with internment camp documents that are more kind of, this is not specifically Holocaust related, but that is getting more at the, or maybe is it Richard or Bill that's worked with the internment camp index, the cards, like identification cards?
Richard, do you want to comment on that?
Well, both Bill and I have been working on that. Bill has done a lot of the heavy lifting with textual analysis from the images and tagging in the form of named entities. And so so we have actually made progress on that project. We've taken, since there's kind of an index card theme here as well in the Morgenthau collection, and you saw that earlier, while we're focusing on the diaries, Abby showed you a whole index card series that connects to this collection, which is something we spend a little bit of time analyzing as well. But we're at the point where we have access to some 25,000 cards, unique cards that have not been made available to the public yet, that describe what actually happened inside the World War II Japanese American incarceration camps. And in those, and those are index cards that are typically indexed by individuals. So it's anything happening to an individual during incarceration, some life event, some Stasi-like accusation, perception of threat by the administrators and the police security and all these things. So we have actually datafied that entire set of 25,000 cards, indexed into them with categories that include name, location, date, alleged type of alleged offense, reference to the police report, on and on. And I'm working with a group of 30 students across 6 different projects this fall to kind of flip the narrative, back to your question, Abby, the question, and look at what really happened, and can we use these very difficult administrative records to actually tell human stories and get to more of the perceived reality of people who are incarcerated and who are the subjects of these documents, etc. So we're in the process of developing personal narratives. What I heard someone describe at a meeting at Yad Vashem last year as computational biographies, the ability to take archival fragments, link them together, and produce a narrative that captures not discrete, disconnected events, but lived human experiences. So that is something we're working on right now. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in and combine 2 questions that came in, which are different, but I think related in a really interesting way. First question is, can you talk about the value of experimentation in these kinds of projects? And the other question relates to interdisciplinary collaboration, and why is this important? Is this usual and unusual? I see a relationship between those 2 questions, experimentation and interdisciplinary collaboration, for the panel, for anyone.
I can start. I think that I have just been amazed by what Teddy and Richard and Bill are able to do, and how, from what I can do is, is kind of do some interpretation of documents, but to have them kind of do the machine learning aspect, I think really enriches what is possible. And so for example, the interface, now users can do a search across all of the diaries at one time. Like they can search the word children, for example, and refugees, and find all of the references to that across the entire diaries. And that was not possible before, because as I was showing in my presentation, you would have to open up each individual PDF and either use the index cards, and so you would know which PDF to open and then which page to go to, which I showed in my presentation, like the process of how you would have to go about that. So having the machine learning AI approach really changes how you can access the materials.
I'd like to comment as well. I think both in the case of machine learning and even applying rule-based methods of things like information extraction, that in building your model and testing it against a corpus or a sample from the corpus, you identify performance of your current model and areas where it might have failed, and that you need to consider how to refine the model and improve the performance. Also, I think you begin to get insight into content issues that you hadn't envisioned when you started out. And so this kind of iterative experimentation and refinement of models is central. It's like the first time you try it, don't expect it to be a successful, complete solution to the problem. It's an iterative process.
Would any of you like to talk about working collaboratively across disciplines? The ups and downs, the highs and lows.
I can jump in. So I've really enjoyed working collaboratively. And I think that each of us kind of provides a different perspective. So it really just, there's so many things that you can do when you're working in this type of interdisciplinary team that you wouldn't be able to do if you're just working on your own. Yeah, that's what I would say for that aspect of the question.
I can speak to previous experience in working with the George Herbert Walker Bush Presidential Library, where we built models to support their gaining control of personal computer records. And I learned so much about the process that archivists have to go through in reviewing records. And we sort of successfully interactively built prototypes that would support them in their analysis of these records and review of the records. And so we were able to explore new techniques, and they were able to evaluate those techniques and the prototypes and suggest improvements. And I think we're beginning to see that sort of thing in the work with the FDR library and working with the Morgenthau Diaries as well.
Thank you. I'm going to read another one of the questions that's come in, but I do encourage anyone out there who has questions or comments to continue to put those into the Q&A box. So thank you for doing that. This next question is asking about how institutions are upgrading their infrastructure to support the shift to digital humanities. Are many places equipped to store and host online the amount of data needed for these new approaches to historical understandings?
I'm not sure if I would be the best person to answer this question. I'm wondering if anybody else has any thoughts on that question.
Well, I work at an institution, and I can say, of course, you wrestle with all kinds of constraints, and storage and computational hardware and so forth is certainly a challenge. From where I sit, probably the larger challenge is understanding the potentiality, understanding the kind of team that you need to put together to do this type of work. So the hardware and computational power and tools and so forth would come needs you need to have people understand the potentiality, understand the value of it, and then actually have people to do the work, show the output, and so forth. So all kinds of challenges as institutions evolve.
I mean, I could echo some of what Michael has said, but it's coming from the same institution. I do think the idea of getting momentum behind these kinds of projects is something to think about. It's not as much the technology as getting an institution to really think about the implications for doing this kind of work, and the importance of people having access to data that can be used in digital humanities work is also part of the stress and the struggle.
So there was another question about so far, how does computational output compare to human-created subject indexing and cataloging by librarians and archivists?
I can comment on that a bit. I've had a project where we looked at creating item descriptions of personal computer records by automatically identifying the document type and automatically identifying the subject of the records. And from having identified the document type, being able to identify who was involved in the document in terms of creating the document, or who it might have been sent to, or if it was a meeting, who was involved in the meeting, so that you're able to create item descriptions. And if you have a series of, say, personal computer records that are in a folder, you can combine the combination of item descriptions and come up with a list of the kind of document types and the kind of subjects and the personnel who are involved, like maybe they all had the same author. And so you come with a folder description, and from a set of folders that might have been in a series of records, you can combine the descriptions of the folders into series descriptions. And we actually ran experiments with actual computer records in the George Herbert Walker Bush library that included personal computer records. And while we could not describe all of the contents, let's say, of a record series, we were able to identify things like, say, a dozen document types and come up with the series descriptions and use them in finding aids. And the archivists evaluated them as being comparable to what they would have created in constructing the finding aids. And so that's the kind of work that I'm going to talk about this afternoon, and the kind of work that Teddy and Richard have begun. We'll go through some experimental evaluations where it will be combined, can be compared to the performance of archivists in performing similar tasks. And one of the goals is to see just how well these automated methods achieve the kind of performance that archivists could achieve, and additional capabilities that they provide to researchers accessing the collections.
Yeah, I just want to add a technical comment that we did do when we first ran the phase one of our two-step machine learning algorithm. So traditionally you collect statistics for what machine learning folks call precision and recall, which are standardized measures of how well the process may have recognized the patterns you trained it on. So we have measures as part of our research that we can share. It's part of a public paper on precision and recall. The thing we didn't really focus on too much, I think Michael Haley Goldman mentioned that at the beginning, of how vital it is to have humans in the loop. So we did create a whole crowdsourcing interface that utilizes the processed version of the table of content images in the form of those attribute value pair nuggets or atoms that we shook loose. And we have some, I forget, it's like a couple 100,000 of those. That's actually, I have the figure on my slides. That's what ends up in that database. So Teddy Randby actually developed an interface that then presents those nuggets in an organized, structured way back to potential researchers, members of the public, through a crowdsourcing interface. And we've actually made a lot of progress by combining sort of the human in the loop with the machine learning process. That's all I want to say.
I can add a little bit as well to that. Machine learning is a tool in the tool belt. It's not a magical fix everything solution. So you can use it to help maximize the amount of work that you can get done. But you have to think ahead and in your testing of the model, how well is it working? Is once it runs, how much are we going to have to do to correct the mistakes it made? Or what are the impacts of in your collection of it making mistakes? So those are all calculations that you have to do as you're experimenting and just trying to see if machine learning is actually a good tool to use in each use case.
And I also just wanted to add that the project that I'm working with, the Morganthau Holocaust Collections project at the FDR Library, there are digitization projects and other digital projects happening. And also, I just wanted to make sure everybody, if you're interested, check out our fdrlibrary.org homepage, and there's a new hub that's going to be launching, kind of exploring these different digital projects that we're working on.
Also, going off of Richard's comment, I think it's important to mention some of the non-Holocaust projects that are happening out here. I think the Humans in the Loop project specifically over at Library of Congress is, if you're interested in how people are working with crowdsourcing and then that as a way to build machine learning and make it better, that's a project you should also check out. So just want to throw that in. There's a lot of really great projects out there that you can learn from for whatever you're considering. So I think one of the things that you were touching on, I think Teddy kind of mentioned this, is a bit of a straw man argument that I just wanted to kind of get reactions from, which is sometimes you'll see people in archives who are worried that machine learning is going to come for their jobs. Does anybody want to comment on that argument in terms of the discussion we're already having?
I think that something that we discovered was that the interaction between the technology and the kind of, I guess, researcher, like the scholarly researcher side, like you need those both together. So like something that we were experimenting with that actually Bill had in some of his slides was, figuring out what is the table of contents, like what are the different documents within each volume, and then not only, what is the title of the document and who is it from and who is it to and what's the date, but like what's the content of that document. And, and kind of annotating and creating more context and linking to other academic resources and research that's been done about that specific topic. And so that type of stuff, you really do need somebody who has experience with that particular historical context, because just the kind of the data without any type of context, there's like would be a missing piece there, I think. So I really think you have to have that collaboration.
I'd just like to mention that with the advent of digital records, archivists, archivists who are currently employed who didn't have that training have to get additional training in order to handle those records. And what's up is the technology is making available to the profession new ways of serving the customers. And it's like museums originally just collected specimens. But then when there was an opportunity to create, recognizing the opportunity to put those specimens in context and provide exhibits, then there became museum curators. So there's an opportunity for the profession to recognize these new opportunities, and instead of replacing the job, it means that, yes, maybe you won't have to spend so much time repetitively doing the things that you've done before, that you'll have new tools to help you with those, and that you can explore new avenues of and new talents in applying your efforts to records.
And if I may just add one thought, based on my experiences working with lots and lots and lots of teams of where practitioners, computer scientists, hardcore data scientists work together. That's kind of the model we have. It's an experiential project-based model. The more successful collaborations have actually precisely been those where archivists have been at the table and involved. And where it takes a little bit of time to learn about the collections, to learn about the context, to get a sense of the tools. And if you can afford those kinds of investments, then what we're essentially trying to do in terms of training and teaching is show that perhaps you could be a very technical archivist, but perhaps as a less technical, because that's not your training and role, as an archivist at the table, you can have a voice and you can actually determine the orientation of these projects. And that's very empowering when this happens and comes together. And it's sort of the sum of the parts creates something that actually can kind of mitigate the tyranny, right, and the terrorism of AI and machine learning, and this fire hose of computational stuff that's coming at us that not a single one of us, regardless of our more technical training, can really fully comprehend or master at this moment in time. So I would actually argue that interdisciplinary collaborations are the only way to move forward, if at all.
Excellent both opportunity and challenge you put out there, Richard, and thanks to everybody on this panel for all of the great parts of the story that you're telling about this project. Looking forward to hearing more, and hopefully you will be inspiring some people out there to do their own projects. So thank you, everyone. I think we're at time.
Yeah, I'm actually going to do a little bit of a closing and let people know what's happening next. So I'm going to share my screen quickly with you all. All right. So what we have on deck, if you go to your lobby and then click on your agenda, you'll be able to see that there is a networking lunch at 12 o'clock today. We hope you'll attend and get to meet different people, attendees and speakers. And then this afternoon, like we were mentioning before, we have a computational methods used in curating the Morgenthau Diaries, where we're going to do more of a workshop format, elaborating on what we talked about here. And then I just wanted to let you know about tomorrow's sessions. So if you click on Friday, we have 2 sessions in the morning, one on the resources available related to the Holocaust at the National Archives and also the FDR Library. And then, as was mentioned, Elena Hoffenberg is going to be speaking about visualizing large collections of images, PixPlot as a tool for digital humanists, with a case study from post-war communal memorial books. And then in the afternoon, in addition to the networking lunch, we have our keynote by Michael Berenbaum called Auschwitz, What We Know Now, What We Knew Then. So we hope that you will join us. And thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.